Hello and welcome to Empire of Wargames. My name is Eplash and today we are talking about the Adeptus Mechanicus Combat Patrol box. We are going to go over what's inside, how many points you are getting for your money, different lists and builds, as well as how this box plays in a Combat Patrol game. If you enjoy the content, consider leaving a thumbs up, subscribing, as well as checking the links down in the description below, like for example Ko-Fi, to support the channel. It really helps a ton. Alright, let's get into the video. Alright, so as always we are going to go over what's inside the box at a quick glance and then go over and analyze all the things one by one. So you are getting one Tech Priest Engine Seer, you are getting one Onaga Dooncrawler, 3 Cataphront Destroyers or Cataphront Breachers, and 10 Skitarii Rangers or Skitarii Vanguard. So all in all, this is basically the combination of the old AdMech Combat Patrol box with an Engine Seer instead of a Dominus and a Cataphront Breacher or Destroyer kit on top. As I already discussed in previous AdMech videos, my first impression was that this box was generally okay looking, but it's also very plain and uninteresting. The AdMech range has received amazing miniatures with Psychic Awakening Engine War, in case you still remember that galaxy-shattering event. And I personally feel like there are better models in the AdMech range, strictly visually speaking. I also think that the Engine War models are old enough to be added to a new and exciting Combat Patrol for the Adeptus Mechanicus. I'd be curious to hear what you think about the AdMech box strictly from a models included perspective, not from a power level perspective. What models would you have liked to see in the box? And yeah, what's your general opinion on the composition of the box? Drop it in the comments below. Another thing I wanted to mention is that the AdMech have recently received FAQ changes that will be linked down in the description below. The general consensus is that not too much will change. The changes have impact, but they won't change the meta too much. Iron Striders will be run in mass detachments now, considering they lost their core keyword, and the stratagems as well as Forge World Lucius have been adjusted, but only time will tell how much impact these changes are going to have. But taking a slow approach to balancing and adjusting factions is welcome, as nerfing them into the ground just weeks after the release is not the way to approach these things. Alright, next up we are going to talk about the savings. We are going to take a look at the price and what the units are offering in general. As you might notice, this specific Combat Patrol box is exactly on the dot average. 32% is usually what we expect from Combat Patrol boxes these days, and it is exactly what this Combat Patrol provides. The Dooncrawler is a big winner here. Getting that model at a discount is something AdMech players have been sorely missing after the replacement of the old Combat Patrol box. Additionally, since we are already on the topic of star collectings, Games Workshop obviously changed the old star collecting with the Dooncrawler in order to not make it too similar to the Combat Patrol we are getting now. As you might know, Games Workshop is done designing products and boxes months or even years before their release, so they went out of their way to offer a different star collecting just to make sure that the Combat Patrol finds more buyers. As for the more recent star collecting, it is different, but the Engine Seer really stings. Other than that, it lends itself great as an additional purchase to the current Combat Patrol box. You are getting a different vehicle, even if the Scorpius Disintegrator is not that great right now. Most people just enjoy playing casually and thus will make great use out of the Disintegrator. Meanwhile, even if you play more competitively, you'll be able to make use of the Scorpius Dune Rider depending on your list. You're also getting 10 additional Skitarii, which are insane in 20-man blobs anyway, so that gets one squad sorted. You'll obviously need way more of them for competitive games, but as for stronger casual lists, this is more or less the perfect number. So to give a short conclusion here, if you are not the most competitive person and enjoy the Scorpius models and like the idea of more Rangers, I do recommend getting the star collecting in addition to the Combat Patrol box, if you can still find it. As you might know, Games Workshop stops producing star collectings after a faction gets a new codex release and thus a new Combat Patrol. Alright, before we go over the units in a little more detail, let's talk rules. I do want to give a short comment on the new codex though before that. I personally like the power level that it brings to the Adeptus Mechanicus, and I do enjoy that completely different units and strategies are viable now. What I dislike is the insane amount of complexity, options, and things to consider during list building. Options and complexity are not inherently bad, but I feel like 9th edition and some codexes are getting to a point that is questionable. I do consider this codex one of them. 8th edition was advertised to be streamlined while still offering a lot of things to tinker with and options to consider while playing. 9th edition has added a lot on top without removing other parts or streamlining other systems. That's why I think 9th is getting a little rules heavy. New players have trouble understanding what they are doing, especially when looking at the new AdMech Codex. I've seen it firsthand. I would like for GW to consider and reconsider their approach to writing new codexes and take a look at the complexity of the game and each faction they are designing. Alright, let's go over the army-wide rules just so everyone is on the same page. AdMech now have access to something called Doctrina Imperatives. The players have the options to enable one such Doctrina each turn, but they are not forced to. Furthermore, you need a Doctrina Assembler model on the board to activate these, so basically a character model. Lastly, you can only pick each Doctrina once and you have 4 available. So you won't have one by turn 5 if you activate one each turn before turn 5. As you can see, the Doctrina Imperatives have an optimization and a deprecation effect. One is a buff or improvement to your units and the other one is a debuff or downgrade for your units. So you have to choose carefully if you want to have a Doctrina Imperative active at a certain time and even if you want to use all of them in a given game. A lot of players decide against using all of them because some of them are just not very beneficial for the tactics and strategies they are going for. There are ways to ignore the deprecation effect by using the Marshal's Control Edict ability, which makes one of your nearby units ignore the deprecation effect. But other than that, there are little ways to ignore that deprecation effect. Next up are the Canticles of the Omnissiah. You can choose one of them, but you cannot choose the same one multiple times. Before you had to roll on a table, but these are very useful as you don't have to roll on them anymore, and the effects have been rewritten to be more useful as a whole. There's not much more to add here. As for fort rolls, my recommendations here are Mars, because Skitarii are usually locked out of Canticles, and Mars enables them to benefit from them, which is insanely strong. My other recommendation would be Lucius, which grants your army a +1 save against damage 1 attacks. The 3 inches of additional range is great too, of course, but take a look at the FAQs to see what changed, just to make sure you're getting all your rules right. Great, with all of that out of the way, let's go over the units one by one and discuss them a little. The HQ in the box is the Tech Priest Engine Seer. I really had my gripes with this model before the 9th edition AdMech Codex released. The Engine Seer was a cheap but kind of useless unit you stuck in between 2 vehicles, and even then the benefits were lacking. Now in 9th edition, I feel like they've made the Engine Seer what it was always supposed to be. A cheap HQ that can really benefit vehicles very well by offering them a +1 to hit. Now, why would this be important? It is important because some vehicles were improved and because no vehicle receives the core keyword. So basically, this is GW's way of balancing vehicles. They make them generally a little bit better, they decrease their points or leave them as they are, but improve their weapons and other stats, but they generally lose the core keyword. And the Engine Seer still helps them get that +1 to hit regardless. Furthermore, you can spend 1 CP to apply that +1 bonus to hit to another vehicle, which is amazing if you're running that kind of list. I feel like that alone is worth the 55 points. All in all, I didn't expect to be so positive about the Tech Priest Engine Seer, but here we are. There are obviously downsides that are not directly related to gameplay or rules. The major one is that literally every single AdMech player already owns one of these, and you really don't need 2 in my opinion. So the Engine Seer will be dead weight for most veteran players. New players obviously don't have that problem. So then, how do you use this guy on the battlefield? You literally leave him in the back, sandwiched by 2 Scorpius Disintegrators or whatever else big hitting vehicle you can find. It is not very nuanced, but it works very well in the few games I have played. My recommendation for new players would be to grab a Skitarii Marshal and a Tech Priest Dominus at some point, as they are both offering amazing abilities and support for your army. Especially the Tech Priest Dominus feels like the bread and butter HQ you usually don't want to miss, especially for more casual games. I do want to mention the Tech Priest Manipulus as well, since that model is seeing quite a lot of competitive play, especially in winning lists, so make of that what you will. Next up is our first troops choice of the box, the Skitarii Rangers or Vanguard. If you have a vague idea how competitive AdMech works by now, or if you've been following any 40k Reddit, you will know that running trillions of these toaster-loving boys is the way to win a fair share of games. Although, as I already mentioned a couple of times, the FAQ might have changed it a little bit. I also feel like they are the reason to give the disclaimer that AdMechs are somewhat of a horde army now. If you play in a semi-competitive environment, like your local store tournaments, which I never thought I'd say, better get ready to play 60 of them. Anyway, let's dive into what makes them so efficient. Alright, so as I already said, you can take them in squads of 20 now, which is a massive buff considering how much more efficient your CP will be in some situations. There are obviously stratagems that scale up with the number of models in a unit, but generally it's nice to drop stratagems on a huge unit than not. This applies to HQ buffs as well. Having a Tech Priest Dominus right between two 20-man squads of Skitarii is just such an effective way to improve your damage potential even further. Next up is the fact that they only cost 8 points per model, which I consider to be insanely cheap, especially in 9th edition where everything tends to go up in points by quite a lot. This means you can grab a full 20-man squad for just 160 points, if you don't get any other upgrades and you go to town. Amazing value all things considered, but I'm expecting this to change in a future FAQ, so let's see what happens. So, Rangers have a new and improved weapon with Heavy 2 and native AP-1. Previously, these guys were insanely strong because of two stratagems, Enriched Rounds and Galvanic Volley Fire. Both of those were changed. Enriched Rounds automatically wounds on 5+ now instead of 4+, and costs more the bigger your unit is, so it costs 2 CP if a unit contains 11 or more models. Galvanic Volley Fire, meanwhile, doesn't change your weapon to Rapid Fire 2, but instead to Heavy 3, which is a huge change. Then there is the Omni specs you can equip your unit with, which allows your unit to ignore light cover and does make it more valuable the more models are in a unit. For 5 points, there is literally no reason not to take it. Lastly, there is a new thing that popped up called the Veteran Cohort from the Warzone Charadon Book of Fire. I put this short because I expect this to get changed very soon. For 2 additional points per model, your models get a 5+ invulnerable save, free cover, extra attacks, and ignore the blast rule. I think you can see why people think it's ridiculous. To put it short, you can make Skitarii insanely durable if you wanted to. They are probably the most points effective troops in a game by far, and with their new Veteran Cohort, there's no debating that. So yeah, if you're wondering what to buy after you've assembled and painted a box, the answer is more Skitarii. Next up is the other troops choice in this box, the Cataphron Destroyers or Breachers. So these guys were sadly hit with some interesting decisions that led to them not being that great at the moment. I have not seen them in any competitive lists and not encountered any of them personally since the new codex released, outside of a narrative game or two. Let's go over why they are not that good, especially against their smaller troops friends, the Skitarii. So the most glaring reason is that they do not have the core keyword. That's enough to make a unit questionable in 9th edition these days. Especially if said unit is in the troop slot of your army, but there's obviously more to it. AdMech has always been a force multiplier army and benefited massively from the buffs their HQs provide. So one of your troops choices not having access to that in an AdMech army feels even worse in my opinion. Furthermore, they are not infantry anymore, but rather bikers, which means that they don't benefit from most cover, performing actions is considerably more difficult, and they can't climb. Thankfully, they are still able to move through breachable terrain due to their ability tracked mobility. Lastly, the units are capped at a maximum of 6, which means you cannot field a massive amount of T6 infantry, or now bikers, that casually sit on an objective while being immovable. But there are a few positives as well. First up, they received a +1 buff to their save, which means breachers are sitting at a comfortable +2 save, while the destroyers have a 3+ save, which is quite nice. They are no longer bound by the D3 when advancing rule and can now use the regular D6, which is nice. Lastly, their weapons got decent improvements, like for example the Torsion Cannon, which has doubled the range now and damage D3 plus 3. So, all in all, it's a give and take. They are perfectly usable units in most scenarios, except for maybe competitive. Furthermore, having tough units with OBSEC is never a bad thing to have. And lastly, there are 4 tools that support them and make them better. So, just put them on an objective, make them shoot a bunch to squeeze out the most potential out of them. Alright, last but definitely not least is the Doomcrawler. Just to say it out of the gate, it seems that the Iron Striders are the best vehicles in the AdMech Codex, because they previously had the core keyword. That is not the case anymore, but when looking at current successful tournament lists, they are omnipresent. But the question we want to answer here, is the Doomcrawler a bad unit? No. And to be honest, it is very rarely the case that I look at a unit and say, well, this one is utterly unplayable and bad. So where does the Doomcrawler exactly rank in? I think the Doomcrawler is a solid C+ of a unit. A C+ is nowhere near enough for competitive, but it's perfect for casual games, narrative, or your Crusade campaigns. So what has changed? So first up, the Doomcrawler obviously doesn't have the core keyword, so GW decided to compensate it by improving its weapons. The Icarus gets a +1 against flyers, but suffers no -1 penalty against non-flyers, which is nice. The Twin Heavy Phosphor Blaster is actually considerable now, with Heavy 8, Damage 2 and ignoring dense cover. Meanwhile, the Neutron Laser is now Strength 12 and Damage D3 plus 3, which is always nice to see. Other than that, there is not really much more to add. If you are in AdMech for the cool models and casual games, just put this guy next to your Enginseer and have fun. Ideally, you have a second vehicle for the Enginseer to buff, but that is obviously not a requirement. I do think the fact that 2 vehicles are preferred and that the Skitarii are so strong leads to the Combat Patrol and the Start Collecting to synergize well. So, just to summarize, the Doomcrawler is your shooty vehicle and you generally want to keep it close to your backline, depending on your loadout of course. I think that running the Doomcrawler and the Scorpius Integrator without an Enginseer will feel bad and generally yield bad results. That's how it went for me, at least in my test games. So as I was already saying, I do think that this Combat Patrol would synergize well with the previous Start Collecting if you have that one lying around or if you can find it in a local store, which should be possible at the time of recording with a little bit of luck. Now, why is that? Generally speaking, you want more Skitarii since they are cheap, cost-effective and strong. They look cool to boot and have at least 20 models in a unit, which is not bad. And even if you don't want to play the AdMech Horde lists, having one squad of 20 Skitarii Rangers or Vanguard is not a bad idea. You can also split them up into 10-man squads if you want to. What I recommend though is that you always allocate 20 to a specific type of Skitarii. Say you have 2 boxes of 10 Skitarii, don't divide them into 10 Rangers and 10 Vanguard, but rather decide for either 20 Rangers or 20 Vanguard, just in case you do want to run them in one squad. The other interesting part is the second vehicle and the synergy with the Enginseer. Instead of having 2 of the same vehicles, you get some variety and you can stick your Enginseer right in between a Doomcrawler and a Disintegrator, which is always a fun thing to do in my personal opinion. Lastly, there would be a second Enginseer, which with the bits from the Skitarii sprues and maybe some creativity and green stuff, you could convert into a Marshal, which would not be a bad idea at all. So, if you can find the previous Start Collecting, it's definitely not a bad thing to have together with the new Combat Patrol. Lastly, let's go over the points included in the box, how I would expand the box, and lists I have played using most, if not all of the content from the Combat Patrol box. So the base AdMech Combat Patrol contains 370 points, which is surprisingly not a lot of points. And that gets even clearer when trying to push this box to 500 points. It is possible, but you are cranking everything up to maximum except for a couple of options. This is an unusual occurrence in Combat Patrols thus far. It is usually easy to get a Combat Patrol above 500 points. That is not really the case here though. So while the savings are average at 33%, the points included might be the lowest out of any Combat Patrol we have seen thus far. Now, how would I upgrade this box and this Combat Patrol to get it to 750 and 1000 points? Now, when it comes to a more competitive approach, I would definitely go for Raiders or Iron Striders. First up, we upgrade our Skitarii Vanguards to 20 and upgrade them with an Omnispecs and with an advanced data tether. Next up, we are going to go for base Breachers to keep their costs low. The rest can be seen on screen. The Iron Striders and the Riders keep the mobility of the list very high while being extremely cost effective and scary, and offering flexibility when it comes to the units they can deal with. This list is extremely fun to play and well worth a try if you want to give it a shot yourself. So updating this list to 1000 points is rather easy. If you want to keep taking advantage of the good units in the AdMech Codex, I would recommend another 20 Rangers, updating the weapons of the Doomcrawler, and adding another Iron Strider. This way you have access to both a ton of anti-infantry and a ton of anti-vehicle firepower. I never felt like I had problems dealing with any threat on the board with this list. Lastly, I want to show you how a list would look like if you were to combine the Combat Patrol and the previous Start Collecting. You can get to 750 points rather easily. It's not the ideal list by any means, but it allows you to position the Engine Seer and vehicles on both sides of the board instead of having to stack them on one side. Alright, so finally, let's get to the conclusion. The box itself offers average savings and very little points. Furthermore, most of the contents in this Combat Patrol were already part of the first AdMech Start Collecting. Does this make the box a bad deal or bad in general? Absolutely not. This box is average in every sense of the word in my opinion. It offers some competitive units with the Skitarii and some less competitive units with the Breachers. It provides you with a decent start for an AdMech force, but not with a lot of points. I saw a lot of people going crazy when this box was announced, but generally I was a little bit bummed out that there were no Engine War models included, and that still holds true. Engine War AdMech models would have made the box way more interesting. To put it short, this box is a decent start for a new AdMech player or a decent expansion for an already existing force, but it's just nothing special. And with that, I'd like to ask you about your opinions about the box, the new AdMech Codex, and if you're happy with how their 9th edition debut went. I'd love to have some discussions in the comments about your opinions, and I'll try to answer as quickly as I can. Thanks a lot for watching, support the channel if you can, and I see you in the next video. Bye bye.